I'd like to share a story about something I experienced last night. Something I just finished discussing with my mother, who is a deaf woman herself. This story entails what happened when a police officer pulled over my mother. So, my mother was driving on a road that she frequents. It's very close to her house. It's a little bit of a main road, and she was not going that fast. She was barely going above the speed limit, and my grandmother, who was 92, was sitting in the back with her husband. As she was driving along, she saw a cop ahead of her that was on a motorcycle, and she was mindful of it, but she kept driving like normal because, again, she wasn't speeding. But as she passed, the cop got behind her and flashed his lights. She assumed it wasn't her because she wasn't speeding. So she switched lanes, and the cop followed her again with his lights on. She switched lanes again, and again he followed her with his lights on. So she was like, all right, I guess he's pulling me over. She went ahead, she parked on the side of the road, and the cop walked up to her as she rolled her window down. So immediately the cop walks up and he begins talking, at which point my mother gestured and explained that she was deaf, she couldn't talk, she was sign with the cop. She turned to the back seat to have a discussion with her parents, and at that point, the cop realized we were all deaf. So at that point, he asked if we could read lips, and my mother tried to explain that she could not read lips. It was a lot easier for her to sign. At that point, she requested an interpreter or at least writing back and forth, but this cop was completely unwilling to communicate. So my mother then explained that she would like to know why she was being pulled over because she was not speeding again. At that point, she handed over her information and was expecting to, and received a citation in turn. So at this point, when the citation was handed to her, she realized she got a ticket. But on this ticket, there was incredibly fine print to the point where we couldn't make any of it out. We couldn't even read what it said. I'm not sure what tickets look like in other states, but it was illegible. The cop then asked my mother to sign the ticket, and she explained that she would take the citation and figure out whether or not to sign it later when she would determine she was guilty or not guilty. But he demanded she sign it now with no radar, no proof that she did anything wrong. Finally, my mother was so frustrated, she said, "I want an interpreter." And the cop was very reluctant, and she said, I have the right to the interpreter. It's the same with the Spanish interpreter. If you request it, it should be appointed to you. So at that point, he continuously demanded that she sign the ticket. There was a lot of back and forth, at which point he told her that she was playing with the law or fighting with the law and that she was going to go to jail. Her response was to drive her grandparents home. If they were going to take her to jail, she was fine with that. So finally, after all this back and forth, she just decided to sign it in the back of her head. She just was really giving up. But now she knows that the next time this happens, on the line for the signature, she's just going to write, "I don't understand why I'm getting this ticket." I honestly, that entire interaction was just so nauseating. Um, Thankfully, we got into contact with someone who is a hearing police officer that advised us to file a formal complaint with the Internal Affairs Office. So, after I did this, I did find that in the state of Nevada, when you request an interpreter, they are required to provide you one. And I am doing this out of support for all deaf people to empower them. I'm curious in your state what the laws are like. So, unfortunately, I did research with ADA and found that it is not general. It is state based, depending on your scenario. If someone is unwilling to communicate or if you need an interpreter, they may or may not be required to provide you one. So, I'm very curious to see what your state laws are. If you request an interpreter, are you required to provide one? This is something I'm incredibly interested in because this police officer was not trying to make himself understood. So, regarding the ticket, you remember the one with the fine print that I couldn't read? Well, apparently it was $300, claiming that my mother was going 40 miles per hour when she was barely going 30, and they claimed the witness was a construction worker who was not there. like I said, there were no construction workers even there. I asked, nothing. And I'm just wondering why is that on the ticket? It's a blatant lie. So I'm really curious if I should go through with this procedure and, try to get the ticket written off or waived. I also saw on a website where there was a bunch of police officers asking if deaf people were even allowed to drive, if we were even allowed to get our licenses. So I'm seeing that we're really behind when it comes to deaf culture in general, and I think it's really time for all of us to take some action and to really get this discussion going.